excited all week since our last Zoom chat to finally catch up. You should have seen me while we were off camera, just trying to get things sorted between us. But when I saw the faces of both Piers Hammond and Steve Hamilton, I got all excited. It was like we were reliving our memories from when we met these guys. So I'll just finish off this this poll. This was just a bit of fun, really, just to see what everyone thought. There'll be more people coming, but I'll end it there, and I'll share the results. So there's the results. Would you ride around the world? Yes, no, worried about certain countries. I put that there because that's what I was thinking.
There's probably a couple we could talk about, Daryl, that most people would be worried about, and we can give you a very different view about that.
I know, and you did when we caught up. It was extraordinary. What bike capacity would you choose? Again, we spoke about this when we met these guys and went across the desert together. I just ran it out, so we weren't in any specific category, but interesting, everyone over 1,000. So the boys will talk a bit about that tonight as well and relive some memories in difficult situations, I'm sure, where they wish they had maybe a 450. So what do you think it would cost for a year away, minus the price of your bike?
Bloody hell, that's an expansive question, Daryl.
So what did I have there? I had up to 10 grand, 10 to 20 grand, 40% chose. 30 to 50 grand, 50% people chose. So you got to remember these boys are on good money. It's all pounds, or a lot more than we're on, the poor Aussie dollar.
We could probably give you left and right of arc of that. Happy to tell you about what was spent, but there were a lot of people doing it on a fraction of what we were able to use, and life savings and the like. So we can talk about that.
Yeah. Have you ridden across the Simpson Desert? 20% said yes, 80% said no. So there we go. All right. Thank you, everyone. Okay, quick snapshot. So Scott McLean, who drives my truck, he and myself were, when was it, boys? 4 years ago now? It's 4 years?
April, May 2017. 2017. Yeah.
So we were, Scooter and I were in our truck, and we were delivering some stuff from Birdsville around to Alice Springs. And we'd been around to Birdsville, and we were on our way back to Alice Springs to drop some stuff off for a tour. And I said to Scooter that particular morning when we left Birdsville, I said, let's push through and get to William Creek. And it's a solid day's drive from Birdsville in a truck with a trailer and around the Birdsville track. And we roll into Williams Creek. I think it was at dark, or just around dinner time. And I remember us pulling up, quickly setting up our beds in the camping ground, and going into the pub, which I love. It's just great outback Australian pub. And we wandered in, and I think from memory, Steve and Piers were the only two guys sitting at the bar. And I kind of noticed there were two bike guys, and then Scooter and I, off we went to grab our rum and cokes or whatever we were drinking at the time, and sat down. And then eventually we got talking to both Steve and Piers, and my mouth fell on the ground once someone started talking about stories about riding from London and around the world, and at that time they were in Australia. So a short note to the story was they'd been in the Simpson, got a day or so in, and were on their way back, just as you can fully understand, carrying your whole life around the world, and then trying to cross the Simpson Desert with your whole life at times can be a bit of a struggle. So we were about to start a tour in a few days' time. So I said, come with us, grab some stuff in Alice, and you can go across Simpson Desert with us and then continue your journey, which I thought was a great thing an Australian should do. So basically, this is how we met. And I think, just talking a little bit more about it, I think that's one of the great rewards in life when I think you do a good thing.
I remember your inimitable words, Daryl, if I may.
What were they?
We'd sank a few beers, and Piers and I were dejected. We'd failed crossing the desert the first time, and I know we'll talk about it in a second. And a lot of those feelings were mine, physically and mentally. We had a real tough couple of days in the desert, and we came out and extricated ourselves. But we were dejected when we ran into you, absolutely dejected about that failure to be able to complete it. And you listened to our story. And at the end of that night, a few Bundy rums and cokes into it, you said, listen, fellas, it would be un-Australian not to offer you another chance to do it. And you provided the means with which we were able to have another go and make it successful. And that's why we're all friends today.
Yeah.
And we'll be forever grateful.
Yeah. And I that's, and I think about it a lot, things that we have done on the road since, whether you help someone fix a flat tire or whatever you do in life, not necessarily even just this. And, it's rewarding because, like you said, we're friends forever. I gained so much out of it. The stories you both had to tell about your journey. Some of those I put in the poll there about countries, because some of those were a shock to me just purely by what we see in the media versus what it's like in reality. So it's been extraordinary, and I miss it. I wish we could do it all again, but tonight will help me relive a bit of that and keep me going until this bloody COVID's out of the way and you can both come back. So
we'll be back in Australia one day, Daryl, together, and we will join you on another tour somewhere crazy. Maybe that Canning Stock Route's got our name on it, I think, one day.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, Canning Stock Route, without a doubt.
So
and we owe you that, Daryl. We owe you that, and we'd love to repay the debt and and we're repaying the debt today, by doing this. But this is an easy thing that you coerced us into, sit and talk about this today on your channel. So
I'm glad you can share the story with the people that have tuned in. So I'll pop up a bit through the chat and prompt with questions and bits and pieces, but I think it's only fair that both you and Piers, I think, maybe start from the beginning. And, I've opened up the chat down the bottom that you guys will be able to see pop up. You don't have to answer it directly, answer it when you feel it's fitting, but people can type in messages and ask questions as we go. So, I think I'll leave it to you boys. And I think initially probably start out saying what you both did before you decided to jump on these motorcycles and ride across that bridge in London in the UK and head off around the world. Okay.
Piers, you want to have a go?
Oh, why not? Yeah, why not? So, picking a start point for this trip's it's pretty difficult, actually, because it's sort of gestation happy, and at some time way in the past for both Steve and I. We were both serving in the Royal Air Force. So myself as a pilot, Steve as a navigator. We had met many years prior to that on basic training. So I think, what was it, 1998, Steve?
Yeah, late 90s, yeah.
That was it, 98, 99, something like that. And, there'd always been that sort of love of motorbikes. And, I think we'd both sort of been mainly road bikers. But Steve, you made that sort of, that leap across to sort of the adventure bike world, didn't you, with the 950 and then 990 KTM Adventure. And then, I just became aware sort of over the years that sort of Steve was starting to talk about this trip. And, there wasn't much detail at that stage, but there was just the trip. And, and that definitely sort of, piqued my ears. you know, I'd always wanted to do a big trip for other reasons, and you know, I don't think I was ever quite sure how I was going to do it. And then when you started talking about doing it on a motorbike, you know, to me that brought, you know, sort of 2 and 2 together, and the answer was 4. And I remember sort of very clearly the day that you had bought your 690 Enduro, and I'd gone up to stay with Steve. He was actually away that day. He was coming back that night. And
you stole it from what I remember from my garage, Piers.
He said, "Oh, you know, the keys are there. Just take it for a ride." And so I found a byway nearby, just outside Southport, and took it for a spin down some green lanes. And at that stage, I was hooked. And so I bought my bike then about 3 months later, and kind of elbowed my way in on your trip.
No, it wasn't that at all. Can I give my perspective, Keir, if you don't mind? Yeah.
Yeah, knock yourself out, mate.
It probably helps, Daryl, just for the audience to, you know Piers and I well. We're very different characters. We're bloody close friends. And by close friends, I mean, we spent a career where we trusted each other with our lives, you know, sat beside each other. So of this relationship, I'm godfather to Piers' youngest boy, Magnus, by the way, so we're close. Piers is the ops director of this pairing. And the trip happened because Piers came on board with it. Because I'd still be talking about it, and you and I would never have met, Daryl, if Piers hadn't come on board. And that largely comes with the different roles that we did in the Air Force, although very similar. We sat with each other inside a military aircraft side by side. Piers is a captain and the pilot of that aircraft, and a natural leader of men. I was a left-hand seat navigator, which is a supporting role, and I've been in a professional supporting role all my life. And it's a bit like, Daryl, you and Scooter in that truck, you know, there's a leader of this gang, and it's you, and you've got your right-hand supporting man that I know you trust with your life, with Scooter, and a very similar relationship Piers and I have. So that's what I was always a great ideas man, you know, talked about this, and people have reminded me I was talking about this all the way through the early 2000s. I don't even remember doing it, but those ideas were forming. And I wanted to get off the public roads because I was racing around on Honda Fireblades and Gixxers at the time. And it was going to end, like most guys in their early 30s, you know, with my life and my license, one of the two. And luckily I found off-road riding. You know, I did a bit of motocross when I was a kid, but I got an enduro bike. Actually, the first one was a little 2-stroke enduro bike, 200cc, and I fell in love with it. And my mates were all getting into it back home. So I traded the big leader sports bike for an adventure bike, and I had a series of those for over about 7 or 8 years. And like most guys that come off the sort of leader sports bikes, they get a big adventure bike. So I went big and went early, like most people do. And the more I got into it, I had friends that were doing enduro at the time. I took tentative steps off-road in the gravel on this big 200 kg beast and went, you know what, my skills are lacking. And this is a monster off-road. And it just really wasn't happening, you know. It was too big, too heavy, too hard. And then eventually made the transition to a big single. Piers and I were both spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2010, I had a particularly challenging tour. And then when I came back from that one, 6 months away, I took myself off to Australia. I had to see a few ex-POM mates of mine, and I hired a DR650 from Ride Around Oz. And that was the moment for me, you know, single cylinder, all your bags on the back, Fraser Island, place like that. And I was completely and utterly so I needed a single cylinder bike, got one. Piers picked one up a couple of years later, and then came on board. And from that moment on to the start point that we picked a couple of years out, we left on that day, 2 years later. And I would say, you know, large percentage of that is because Piers made it happen. And that's it. The idea, though, just one more thing. The idea, you know, we had a very close friend, dear friend of mine, Buggy Webster, and his wife Jill. They retired from the Air Force about 10 years before this, and went around the world with backpacks. And this is in the days before social media, Zoom and iPhones and all those things. And they wrote a blog on it, but it was very difficult to follow because about once a month they'd write a blog and you'd get an email, and then you'd have to read the email. There was no interaction like this. And it was rather lost in most people, but that was a spark that stayed with me and got us to the start line. So that's the background.
Well, you, I know I've asked you these questions, but this is for everyone, but leaving your job and then deciding, okay, this was the date, how, and I guess potentially friends, partners, whatever situation you were in your life at that time. It's,
I was single at the time, Daryl.
Yeah,
yours is slightly more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, for me, life presented me with with an opportunity. In that I was in the process of getting divorced, kids are at boarding school, and so although I had 2 young kids, being away from them during the term time was not unusual. So for me, although it wasn't as clear cut as the situation that Steve was in, life presented me with an opportunity, and I figured if I didn't take it then, I probably would never take it. And bless her, my ex-wife was actually massively supportive in facilitating that with the boys as well. And I think one of the really important things for me also was, although I was away for 19 months in total, in the end, every school holiday I would fly my boys out to wherever I was, or fly home, and put the bike down and do adventures with them. So the boys ended up coming out to Oz. They came out to Thailand, Laos. So they got some great stories out of it as well. But yeah, definitely, it was difficult to make that decision to go. But I just resolved myself with the fact that life had presented that opportunity, and if I didn't take it then, I just never would. I mean, reference sort of leaving the job.
Just elaborate on that. We both had long careers. We'd lost a lot of close friends, Daryl, through training accidents, flying accidents, and on operations. But actually, more than that, we'd lost guys that we knew well and were close to through other ways, cancers mostly. And Piers and I used to wax lyrical about it. It's one life, you got to live it. It's not a dress rehearsal. And we were adamant about doing this. It wasn't easy, making the decisions that we made to do it. We both had very successful careers at the time to step away from it, but we had a feeling that there was more to life than this. We'd been to all the trouble spots of the world. We never had the opportunity to see the nice bits, or see the other side of it. But we had a sense there was more to life out there than what we'd given to the Royal Air Force, and we gave it our all, and we're both very proud of that time in our lives that we gave to it. For me, I'm divorced as well, a long time before Piers, and happily, if that's possible, and I had a daughter about to go to university, and she won a scholarship for university. So I had a lot of savings lined up to pay her through university that were now freed up because she had won, by her own admission, a paid scholarship. So that made it financially a little bit less challenging, although it was still challenging. And Piers actually put me on the spot because a year to go to that start point, Piers committed and went all in and did it and told the Air Force he was leaving because he had to at 12 months to go, which put me in an invidious position because after having talked about this for 10 years or more, he'd committed to it, and there was no going back. So I wasn't in the greatest physical shape at the time. I had a couple of operations on my back that time, 2 sets of rehab, second one successful. I finally got myself in a good physical state, and at 6 months to go, I committed to it. And we were all in. Daughter was safely at university, and then that next 6 months from that to the start point was just crazy, and probably the most pressure and stress we've put ourselves under ever to get to the start line. And we always say, since a lot of people talk about the big trip, we got to the start line because Piers got us to the start line and got over. He committed to something. A lot of people talk about it, don't ever achieve it, and there'll be a few in this call. And anyone that talks about the big trip gets to the start line and takes one step across it and rolls at one wheel across that start line is successful in my book, no matter how far they get.
Yeah.
Hell of a thing to do.
Yeah, without doubt, the most difficult thing about a trip like this is getting to the start.
Doing it's easy.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, these Zoom calls that I've been doing the last sort of month or so, we've covered.
Especially, you know, in the run up to the departure date, and we were having real issues with visas, and especially Iran and stuff like that. You know, we sort of sat, I can remember sitting there in the kitchen and going, right, do we delay a week? You know, do we delay, 14 days just to give ourselves the breathing space? And, you know, Steve was like, absolutely no way. You know, this is the date we've now committed to. You know, if we try and line up everything and get everything perfect before we leave, you know, we'll never leave. And he was absolutely right, you know. And so, sure enough, when the allotted day came, we crossed the bridge and set off.
You know,
although the lesser known story is, of course, we then both rode home that night to finish off a couple of last bits of admin and then properly set off the day after. But, you know, yeah, without doubt, that's the biggest thing. The minute you start, then all you got to do is wake up every morning, decide roughly what direction you're going to ride, find something to eat, find some fuel, and ride for the day. And just repeat that 561 times, and you get around the world. You know,
yeah,
it's that's just the mindset you got to, I think, approach it with.
Before we launch into sort of countries and spooky spots and all that sort of stuff and the unknown, we've spoken a bit about it on Zoom calls over the last few months, as I was about to say, just purely trying to help adventure riders trim weight. You know, we see so much load on bikes and unnecessary. And I think a question for both of you guys, it's helpful for all of us that set out on solo travel or travel with a mate, and very different to what we do in our tours. But did you shed much from the start, or did you change your equipment much from lightweight equipment to heavy equipment? And I guess all that advice is great advice for the adventure riders that are listening.
Daryl, we say, look, we've always said there's no right or wrong way of doing this, you know, and you know, Piers and I aren't gonna shove our own, you know, ideals down people's throats and tell you how to do it. There's every bike on the planet's got two wheels on. It's an adventure bike. Honestly, there's a young lad, Nathan Millward, came from Australia to the UK. You know, Sydney to London on a postie bike, 110cc, $500 in his pocket. And he did pretty much the route Piers and I did on his own. I had a hell of an adventure, wrote a book about it, you know, and we were very well prepared. I think, you know, you've got to decide, you've got to enjoy the ride that you're on. This is going to be your home for 18 months or however long you take doing it. So you got to enjoy the ride. You've got to match it to your own capability level. You know, what sort of a rider are you? What sort of riding do you want to do? Is it more off-road, more on-road? How much comfort do you want to take? You know, what's your budget? And when you boil all those questions up, you'll end up in a sort of, you know, a narrow group of or bikes or way to do it. And Piers and I ended up in that space, you know, 600-700cc, lightweight as possible. But I think we set off on day one at about 250 kilograms, totally over. Honestly, is that about right, Piers? I think we were, weren't we?
Yeah, with full fuel. Yeah, I reckon you're about right. Yeah.
And we shed a lot as we got on. The further we got on, the lighter and more efficient we got. And once we'd been sort of camping for a while and stuff, you know, you knew what you really needed as opposed to the luxuries. We ditched them. By the time we got to the Simpson Desert, I think the bikes were a good bit lighter, and they needed to be, because we needed to carry a lot of water and fuel across, and we were back up at 250 again, I think, you know, starting that off, and it was tough doing it that way. So
yeah,
no right or wrong answer, right, whatever, but lighter is better always.
Yeah. And you know, I think one of the extraordinary parts of hearing your stories around the bush TV at night in the desert was, you know, obviously you've spoken about being in the Air Force, and were you nervous about going back to places where you've served your country and then realizing that you had to hand your passport over and show a visa and continue? Were you worried about that stuff?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yes.
Steve's already commented on the fact that we, without a doubt, because of what we had seen on operations over the last 15 years of our service, we had a fairly jaundiced view of the world. But because we had sort of got involved in this adventure biking community, call it what you will, we had met people who had ridden through Iran, like Lewis Price, just guys and girls who'd just gone and done these amazing trips in places where, 5 years ago, Steve and I would have been, well, in fact, there was one particular, in fact, just about here, I think, in the Pamir Highway, we were riding down the river that separates Tajikistan and Afghanistan, and Steve pulls out a few photos of him taking photos from the other side of the water, and so that was just the reality of it. But so we kind of knew, we kind of had a good idea that as I said, that we had this really jaundiced opinion of the world, and we had a pretty good idea that actually the world really isn't like that. And 99.9% of the world is just trying to get on with their lives and are just really nice, friendly people. And the trip reinforced that in spades. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially going to Iran was probably the biggest, in terms of the OMG factor. For us as former serving, military personnel. And probably with more inherent risk as former military serving personnel going into Iran. And in fact, I know you guys and Oz quite recently had a couple of your nationals who were arrested in Iran. So the dangers are absolutely still there. But
I didn't want to do Iran, Daryl. Piers talked me into it to begin with. And then it went 180. So we started throwing, darts at a wall of the countries we wanted to visit. And eventually, a route fell out of that. And Piers from the start wanted to do Iran. As serving military officers, we weren't permitted to visit Iran as tourists. So we had to wait until we retired to be able to do that. So Piers kept going on about Iran, and I kept shaking my head going, like, I don't mind a bit of risk, but stupid risk, no. And he softened me up over the time. And before I knew it, we were applying for visas and that sort of thing, and I was playing along with it. And when we set off on the journey, we still didn't have the visas secured, and we were looking at alternate routes around that part of the world. Through other countries like Azerbaijan and across Caspian Sea and things like that to avoid it. And then it started to get interesting. And Piers, you probably a better perspective on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the benefits, those who may not be aware, as either a British, American, or Canadian passport holder, traveling Iran is just a no-no. And it certainly was when we set off, unless you're accompanied by a government-approved guide for the whole of your time in Iran. Through some research on the internet, I'd managed to come across this guy who ran a tour company who was prepared for a not insignificant amount of cash to basically write us a fictitious tour, get us the visa, get us into the country, and then just leave us be. Again, I can remember that moment, Steve, when you and I were going, right, what do you reckon? Do we commit to this guy? And I think it was 400 euros each we had to pay him, didn't we? Just for his sort of fixing services. So, in the end, I think we just sort of said, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. Hit send, sent him the money, and then pretty much it all went quiet, didn't it? And then we got to the point of departure, and we still didn't have any sort of form of feedback. There was elections going on in Iran at the time, I seem to remember, just before we left. And eventually we got an answer back saying, oh, it's all delayed because of the elections. We had decided clearly to be very upfront and honest about what we were doing as careers. So we then got a request to submit very detailed military CVs to the Iranian authorities. In the end, we set off on the trip with no Iranian visas, and trekked down through Europe, got ourselves into Turkey. And by this stage, it was getting to the stage, as Steve has said, that we really needed to get into Iran, because we had also stacked up a number of visas. So getting through Central Asia is probably the most difficult in terms of visas. And we had stacked up a whole load of visas for the countries after Iran. And we were getting to the stage where if we didn't get in, we were going to lose all these subsequent visas as well. So eventually, about halfway through our stay in Turkey, I think we'd just been down on the south coast of Turkey, riding back towards Ankara. And we finally got a message from this guy saying, right, your letter, so basically before you can even get a visa, you have to apply for the right to apply for a visa, if that makes sense. Just wonderful bureaucracy. And so this is what this guy was doing. He emailed us and said, right, I've got your letter of invitation, so you can now go to the embassy in London and pick up your visa. And of course, we're like, mate, no. We said Ankara in Turkey. So we then spent sort of the next 6 hours looking at flights to get back to London, all sorts of stuff. And again, this is where, Steve and I sort of complement each other, is that, I was trying to do everything by the book, and Protestant said, well, why don't we just rock up to the Iranian embassy in Ankara tomorrow and see what happens? And I think in the end, you managed to get hold of
a phone call to someone.
Yeah, that's right. And teed it up, and then the following morning we rocked up at the Iranian embassy in Ankara, basically expecting to be told to go back to London to pick up these visas. And this guy was just awesome, sorted us all out. I think later that day, he then got us to come back with our with our passports and more money, obviously. I think it was then about another 150 euros each. And then we got back to the embassy. It was like, no, now you leave your passport here. And it's, again, it's another one of those moments, do I really want to hand over my passport? But again, fortune favors the brave. And I think I've got the photo actually here somewhere. See if I can just dig it out. But yeah, that evening, basically, we got 2 passports stamped up with Iranian visas and permission to enter the country, which was pretty exciting.
Just a little bit of human interaction, Daryl. Over a phone call and meeting someone on the other line for this guy to help us, and he wanted to help us. Like the same. You can make an assessment of someone in the first 5 or 30 seconds of whether they're a decent person and you want to help them or not. And you'll have done that when you met Piers and I that night in the pub, Daryl. You'll have made an initial assessment, and then a few rum and cokes down the line, decided, you obviously decided we deserved an opportunity to have another go at the Simpson. But we did that all the way through our trip. You become very highly attuned at being able to assess and judge situations and people. And we didn't have that before. We had it rudimentary, but you learn to trust your instincts on a trip like this, and you become very good at it, after you have thousands of interaction, and you're rarely let down. Your instincts rarely fail you. And it's disappointing when that does happen. But
I think I got a photo.
So we were committed to go into Iran at that stage with visas in the books, and we were both going, "Oh my God!"
And is the facial growth coming on for a reason of where you're heading, or is that?
Yeah, it's exactly that, Daryl. So, yeah, no, I mean, we had, at that stage, Steve and I done God knows how many tours in Afghanistan, and the big thing in Afghanistan was the fact that facial hair brought you respect with the locals and stuff like that. So we had this sort of crazy notion that to be expected and to blend in, we needed to have these big, massive, bushy, crazy beards. And the reality of it is, with the benefit of hindsight, it turned out to be utterly hilarious and utterly pointless. In fact, I've got another cracking photo here I'll share with you, which is me crossing the Pakistan border. So, just the notion that I thought I was somehow blending in with this, 200 kilo bright white KTM rally bike, just because I'd grown a beard and wore a pockle, was quite hilarious. But it kind of showed willing, but it was completely unnecessary in any of the countries that we thought it was. The only benefit really was not having to shave every morning.
And how did you find Iran in after all that?
Iran was highlighted, one of the highlights of the trip. That in Pakistan, Daryl, the people there were truly amazing. You have to remember, the Shah of Iran was an ally of the UK not that long before, just a generation before. The young people were Western in their outlook. The hijab wasn't being worn by all the young people, as routinely and as you may think. We were passed from family to family to family, looked after, giving safe food, lodgings, security, all the way around Iran. They were wonderful people. They spoke English very well. They watched, they had pretty much, either restricted and controlled internet access, but what they did have was access to American movies. So they're into pop culture and American movies and big car, things like that. They all wanted to speak English. We were certainly the first British English-speaking tourists 99% of them had ever met or talked to. We were rock stars in Iran, Daryl. Remember it fondly. Never forget it.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I think we first got a sense, because obviously just in terms of the route, we left the UK. We spent probably a good 3 weeks in sort of Western Europe and at that stage it just felt like a sort of a bit of a boys' holiday, and then I remember when we went into Greece, and that first chance meeting at the roadside, and that's when we started to get a sense of what life on the road in these more Eastern and Asian countries was going to be like, and then Turkey was then the next step up from that. And in a not dissimilar way to the way we met you, Daryl, we bumped into a KTM rider, a guy called Serkan Özdemir, who had completed the Dakar a couple of years previously, ended up riding through Turkey with him, and we were just getting that sense of it. And then, Iran was still a massive difference. At the end of the day, people go on holiday to Greece, people go on holiday to Turkey, but people don't really go on holiday to Iran. And so, for us, there was a great deal of anticipation and, sort of concern crossing the border. And, there was whole, having sort of got the visas, we then had another issue at the border where this fixer who had initially got us into the country, because we had basically snubbed him slightly because we weren't going via his house to stay with him for one night, then tried to stop us getting across the border. And, again, bless him, Steve just turned around and said, well, what's the worst that can happen? Let's just rock up to the border and see what happens. Which, when you look back at it now and go, right, so we'd left the military 10 days previously to this. So we were 10 days into our civilian sort of lives. And, we have been told categorically we are going to be arrested if we cross the Iranian border. And, probably just went, well, let's just turn up and see what happens. And we were both had already changed so much as people that I was like, yeah, right, let's give it a shot, and you know, Steve, I can remember as we drove out of that Iranian border post, and you know, with that, there was that massive flag, wasn't there, on the right hand side of the road, and we just sort of stopped, looked at each other, and just, you know, popped the visors up and went, excuse my French, fucking hell, we're in Iran. You know, it was just
we
one
put
of
so
those.
much into it. We put so much into it, Daryl. You know, leaving the Air Force was a big decision. Years of effort we'd put into planning and prepping for this, the training that we did, you know, equipment put together. This was the moment, you know, for us that we were on a once in a lifetime adventure. That moment there, that flag. So we weren't going to duck it, you know. Having put all that effort into it, to turn back at that stage and play safe wasn't going to happen. And you know, and that happened to us, you know, a couple more times. Another one like that was, my bike was in real rough order. I was struggling with it entering Tajikistan, and we'd gone to Tajikistan specifically to do the Pamir Highway, you know, and that had been on the top 10 list, you know, from the origin of the graph. And you know, a less risk averse person would have taken Route 1 direct on the bitumen, you know, and not do that 1500k through off-road 16,000 foot passes with a bike that was limping and bleeding oil, and a countershaft that was failing, and a bearing that was gone. But you know what? I didn't come that far to not do it. So in we went, and we limped round, and fortune favors the brave, and fortune seemed to favor the brave, you know, for Piers and I on more than one occasion on this trip, you know. It's
amazing, you know, even from, I think you guys spoke about, you know, those few nights in the desert, but even other stuff I've seen, you know, like for me, even just seeing that dirt road there crossing into a border, I think, holy Toledo, you know, like, where's that going? But I bet you there's a guy over there somewhere in a back street in a building that's either got a bearing or some way of fixing your bike. That would be the extraordinary thing about it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I ended up limping around Tajikistan. We got into the next country, was Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan is you know, former Soviet state, and I mean it's going back to the, you know, 50s, 60s. The workshops there are all classic old lathes and things, and I needed a bearing, a sprocket. I needed a washer. I needed to fashion something. You know, I ended up almost welding a front sprocket onto a countershaft that was destroyed. Did it all in a ex-Russian workshop. Not a word spoken in English. Just guys pointing at things, going, needing help, and having an understanding of how we were going to solve it. And all done and paid for through the international currency of beers.
Yeah.
All the way around, you know. Buys you all sorts of access. But again, you know, just being a good human being and shaking a hand and looking someone in the eye and asking for help, and not being too on the front foot or too demanding, you know, in places where you need a lot of help, and if you don't get it, you're in a difficult place, you know. So we learned to be better human beings all the way through this trip as a result.
Yeah. You find fuel a trouble, not supply, but quality?
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah. So you know, again, you know, it comes back to Iran. I mean, Iran is probably you know, was the genesis of so many different stories, but Iran was the first country that we rocked up into, which, with the benefit of hindsight, the fuel was appallingly bad. But because we'd just come out of Greece and Turkey at that stage, where, you know, you could rock up and get 95 octane wherever you wanted, we didn't really give it a second thought. The benefit of hindsight, we were probably running sort of mid 70 octane fuel throughout Iran, and then through most of Central Asia. And, you know, one of, unfortunately, the failings of the KTM 690 Enduro is it's a really high compression engine. And, you know, I can remember very vividly the exact moment the first bit of metal was basically blown off the side of my piston. I didn't know that at the time, but it happened about 2 weeks into Iran. It was when probably you remember we rode into the dash gear conveyor, and bizarrely ran into the Slovak deputy ambassador and his family in the middle of the desert, which is a whole different story. It was the only beer that we had in the whole of Iran, but it was just amazing. But you know, with the benefit of hindsight, that was the start of my piston starting to break up. And you know, we then had another issue. In fact, probably the longest day that we had on the road in Uzbekistan, which by this stage we were getting more savvy to the fact that the fuel wasn't all good quality, and we'd just managed to find probably the only sort of 85 octane in country, which was deemed to be, you know, that was for the posh people in Uzbekistan. And we were then setting off on quite a long day across the desert, a tarmac road through the desert, but between two cities. And about halfway along that, all of a sudden my fuel light came on, having just put 32 litres into both of our bikes. And in the time it took me to go, oh, that's not right, you know, the engine stopped. And basically I'd worn through a fuel line, and it had just dumped that 32 litres of fuel all over the desert. So ended up repairing that. Probably had about 30 litres left. So we split that 50-50, ended up getting fuel out of some plastic bottle at the bottom of a TV mast that someone said, you know, there's definitely fuel there. Thought nothing else could go wrong that night. And then literally we were about an hour to our destination, having been on the road for about 20 hours that day. Pitch black dark, absolutely knackered, and my bike just died again. And again, with the benefit of hindsight, what it was another bit of piston blowing off, and it smashed into the spark plug, closed the gap on the spark plug, which eventually we managed to diagnose. But you know, whilst I'm critical of the engine sort of starting, you know, because it was high compression and starting to break down, you know, actually that KTM engine got me about 5,000 miles from the center of Iran, with bits breaking off the piston all the way to India. And that's where I replaced it. And I remember when I dropped the piston, you know, when we dropped the piston out, it was, you know, there were proper big chunks blown out of it. And, you know, that's just a result of poor fuel, but there's, you know, there's nothing you can do.
So you know, we had pre-filters, you know, in the fuel pumps, Daryl. We had after the fuel pump, we had 10 micron filters as well. A lot of guys use now, you know, a little sock, you know, when you're pouring in the fuel in the tank, you know, and we had been doing that too. You know, if you're going to use a modern electronic fuel injected engine, you know, that's about all of the precautions you can take. You know, if you want to go old school, carbs and all that, you know, that's a different question entirely. And I think most of the people on this call are probably talking about taking modern-ish bikes with fuel injection, you know, around the planet. Yeah, there were times we wish we'd been on carb bikes, you know, old school DR style or XR style, but that's not what we decided to do, and we were committed to our own path, you know, course of action. And yeah.
And when you, you know, that part of Iran and then moving on and then through, I guess, more where you spent your time serving your country, did you know, again, and it left my mouth open, you know, just the stories, but again, Pakistan and places like that, you know, where we see the news here, and both you said the same.
Yeah,
thing.
we
Extraordinary great people.
you know, Tajikistan, you know, like Piers has said, you know, the Panj River is the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, and when we reached the river, I had been on an operation about 10 years before on the other side of the bank of that river and landed there, and I had the photographs with me tucked away. One of the missions I'd been on, I wanted to get as close to that place as I could again, but on the other side of the river and legally, and I achieved that. It was a hell of a moment. Pakistan, yeah, we went through the western part of China to get to the top of the Karakoram Highway, and that's us crossing at China Gate from western part of China into the top of the Karakoram Highway. The Karakoram Highway is on every adventure rider's bucket list. It had been on mine for years. We wanted to ride it. It goes through, you know, a very remote region of northwestern Pakistan, and up until the summer of 2016, it had been a dirt road, And when we got there later that year, the tarmac had literally just reached China Gate. And Pakistani families were spending that summer getting into their cars and driving the length of it to the border with China. And we crossed into Pakistan, nervous again, about as nervous as we were crossing into Iran. And we were, for the second time in this journey, swamped with hospitality and rock star status again. And we couldn't believe it. We spent hours there. Everyone wanted photographs. Piers ended up with a hat, a glove, a coat. In fact, you've got a better story about some of the stuff that you got as gifts at China Gate in Pakistan, Piers.
It was just fabulous. I mean, China was a bit of an emotional ride. It was very expensive. So in China, it's a mandated guide to get through China, and I think for our 4-day crossing, it cost us about $1,500 US each, and then hotels and stuff on top of that. There was no option to camp that much. And, China was probably the one country, I don't know about you, Steve, but it certainly left me feeling a little bit empty. Just the people there really reserved, really standoffish. By this time, we're really trying to engage with people. And, they just weren't interested in just talking, which was a real shame. And, but the ride up to the Kunjara Pass, the border into Pakistan, was just spectacular. And literally the last act as we left China was this border guard, gruffly sort of jabbed you in the chest, demanded your passport, looked at it, threw it back at you, and you just went, awesome. Rolled the bikes 10 meters forward to cross over into Pakistan. And the first thing that my first memory was being met by this guy, Pakistani Frontier Corps uniform. So sort of black, AK sort of slung over his shoulder, exactly the sort of images that all through our time in the military, we had sort of grown to be really fearful of. And this guy was like, "Hey, welcome to Pakistan. Is there any chance I can just check out your passport?" And it was just incredible. And then, as Steve's alluded to, so this was height of the monsoon in southern Pakistan. So a lot of the well-to-do families in Pakistan, they all come up to the northern areas where it's much cooler to escape the monsoon. And one of the day trips they do is up to the Kunjara Pass. And so as we crossed the border, there must have been, 300-400 tourists. Say Pakistani families on a day excursion out to the highest border crossing in the world, and the highest cash point in the world, I think, as well, if I remember rightly. And so we were just mobbed in a super friendly way, and people just wanted to know who we are, what we were doing. And it also turned out that, and I'm sure the Aussies will appreciate this, that the day previous, Pakistan had beaten England at Lord's in the cricket for the first time in 25 years. So they thought all their Christmases had come at once because they had an English bloke to speak to about cricket and tell them, tell me how wonderful Pakistan were beating them at Lord's. And it was just amazing. These guys were giving us gifts. I mean, there was one young family there, one young lad with his family who'd come up from Karachi, Karachi, South Coast. This guy's used to living in sort of 30, 35 degrees. And up at the top of the Kunjara Pass, it was snowing. It was probably about 1 or 2 degrees. And he has literally just got the Shalwar Kameez shirt on, a pair of shorts and this blanket wrapped around him. Steve and I are there, full Gore-Tex, merino wool underwear, as roasty as can be. And this guy was not taking no for an answer when he presented this blanket to me and said, no, this is a gift. This is a gift. Welcome to my country. You're a guest here. You're a traveler. If you get down to Karachi, please come and see us. Where are you going? Can I put you in touch with some friends in Lahore? And really from that moment on, that's just how Pakistan was all the way through. And Steve, I know you've got some amazing stories, because Pakistan was one of the first places where Steve and I ended up going in slightly different directions, which was always, a bit of a plan from the start, because there was a particular event I wanted to go and see up in the Hindu Kush, which wasn't too much of an interest to Steve. Plus, also his bike was failing massively, and so actually that was one of the first times we ended up riding solo. And again, the hospitality we had was amazing. And Steve, I know you've got a great story about what happened to you on that ride down to Islamabad.
Yeah, so we went solo. My bike, I was just trying to limp it to Lahore, get across into India and get to Delhi, where we had flights booked a few weeks later to come home to the UK, take a break from it all. And we'd booked them 6 months before. And, they were cheap, and definitely wanted to make that. And I wanted to get my engine out of the bike and take a good look at it and repair it. So I a couple of stories, I got between two landslides for a couple of days, high up in the Himalayas again. So landslide behind us, one in front of us, ended up in a couple of hundred cars, and they were all, behind each other, cars, trucks, bikes. And you just stopped where you happened to be when the landslides cut us off at either end. So when you were there for a couple of days, that's Piers saying goodbye to me as I was limping my bike home. And over the next 24 hours in Pakistan, the assembled mass in that cavalcade of cars and trucks and bikes, from donkeys and carts to bikers like me, to people in trucks, to people with wealthy people, poor people, they sorted themselves out into caste order effectively. So the wealthy entitled people at the front of the queue and the poorer people at the back of the queue over the next 24 hours. And they just understand that was the way it was in society in Pakistan at the time. None of them questioned it. They just got on and did it. And having, tried to be incognito with the beard and feeling miserably, I was the international tourist at the time, and I was invited to the front of the queue, where a very important Pakistani family there showered me with gifts, and again, more rock star status. And I ended up being presented with a gold bracelet by the wife of this eminent Pakistani individual, this family that were traveling with their own security detail, for a bracelet to give to my a daughter when I got back to the UK. And it was all, and the interpretation was done by their teenage daughter, who spoke perfect English with a London accent, because she was at a top finishing school in London and back visiting her family at the time. Just incredible stories. But that went on. We were handed from family to family to family, safe passage all of the way through Pakistan, from we crossed the border till we left. I mean, I ended up with patches on patches and punctures on punctures, going through that region. I had ran out of tubes, and ended up, wherever you ended up in a town or a village, on your own, very quickly, the most prominent man in the village would be summoned, and he would appear, and you would be taken off to the most amazing destinations for dinner and support and help, and if you'd just been parachuted into there and hadn't learnt from the experience that Piers and I had over the 6 months, you may think you were being transported off to your death somewhere, but we weren't in that space. We were savvy. We knew what was going on. We were integrating into the society. We've been passed from family to family and given safe passage. And at no time I was in Pakistan did we feel anything other than completely safe and secure. I put a photograph up on, I found some internet somewhere in a remote place and pinged a photograph, and I was stood with 3 or 4 Pakistani men helping me out with punctures in a roadside shack. And I had a safe word, if I'd ever been held sort of hostage, that I gave to a few friends that I trust with my life, ex-military guys. And I put that up on the internet and got a response back going, safe word. They were just checking I wasn't being held against my will. And that's how integrated into society that we had become. We felt that we'd become one of them. We looked that way, smelled, felt, and we were being passed from family to family, but we were totally safe and secure. And that's a surprise to, it's not a surprise to any travelers you tell that story to, but people that haven't had that experience, you know, Pakistan will find that hard to believe, I know, and call bullshit over it. But you know, the truth is there within, and that was the experience that we had. They're wonderful people. The level of education was much higher than I expected in Pakistan. Good English was spoken by a large number of people throughout. So we were able to integrate with them. We were able to converse with them. We were able to, you know, just have an amazing experience all the way through, right to the border.
We, you know, we hear stories, and I don't know if it was in your travels, I think we spoke about it, but a couple of cyclists, I think, disappeared or they were murdered at some time, or, yeah, and I don't even know what country that was in, but.
Yeah, that was in Tajikistan, Daryl, on the Pamir Highway. And that was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago.
And do you think that's just timing, or, you know, what, just bad luck?
Wrong place. You can end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, Daryl, anywhere in the world. I think that's part of it there. There were Americans in that group as well. I think that had been quite overt about that. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but clearly they had been targeted. And that could have happened to Piers and I at any time. But, you know, we had each other's backs. We're savvy. You can feel the tension, you know, Daryl, when you're in different places. You can, it doesn't need to have a banner on it to say this place is not safe. You feel it and you touch it and you smell it. You know, the children aren't out on the streets playing with, you know, a ball and a stick. You know, people are behind closed doors. You know, you're probably not meant to be there. But you can also, very importantly, and we learned to do it, you know, you can soften your approach and how you present each other. If you arrive on a 700cc motorcycle that looks like something from outer space to these people, with a helmet on, dark sunglasses, gloves on, and a black riding suit, you're pretty threatening, or can arrive pretty. You arrive in a cloud of brake dust, and, you know, like you're on the Dakar rally. You know, you can run quickly into trouble and arrive there very fast. But if you take the time to arrive at these places, these villages and remote places, stop, come to a standstill, you know, before you enter them. Present yourself as non-threatening and subservient. Take your helmet off for a little while. Take your sunglasses off. Take your gloves off, because thrusting your hand out and shaking the hand of someone is a gesture that's very hard to turn down, even if you don't like the person. Someone thrusts their hand towards you to shake it. If you know, it's very difficult to refuse that. And very quickly, we'd often find, you know, kids would come out of the ditches, and, you know, kids are curious. They'd come out, you know, the elders would send kids out to go and check whether we were threatening or not. And they'd heard you from miles before, and you know, the jungle drums were already beating that there were strangers in the area. And if once you diffuse that situation, Daryl, the world was your oyster. You're very quickly meeting the village elders and being taken to dinner and all the great things that happen and traveling. But if you get that wrong and you ride bluntly, you know, you can end up in trouble quick. And we had to learn to be better at that as the journey progressed.
Where was the goat curry better than William Creek? Which country?
Oh, Pakistan. We had some of the most amazing.
Curries were amazing.
Oh, man. The food.
And
that's another.
Yeah. Go on, Steve.
No, sorry. The food around the journey, the smells and the tastes stay with you forever, Daryl. You know, we had some of the most amazing meals cooked for us. India, Pakistan, places like that. You'll always remember where you had it, what it tasted like. I mean, when you're someone like Piers and I travel in a remote place like that, and you are a very honored guest. I mean, these people are going out and killing a goat, quite literally, and that's not a joke. And that happened to us on a number of times. I mean, they're putting an enormous amount of time, effort, you know, and their livelihoods into hosting you.
Yeah.
Never forget it.
Yeah. And then
we never got the goat's head, did we?
No, we never got the goat's head or the eyeball. You know, quite disappointed by that, but it never quite happened.
So where did you two meet back up again? Then into Asia, or?
Yeah, Delhi and India.
Yeah.
And but that stage, Piers's bike was coughing and spluttering to a halt as well. So we limped into Delhi, and we pulled the engines of both. And rather than fix them there, we stuck them both in a box and brought them home with us. And we rebuilt them in the UK and brought them back. Now that sounds simple, Daryl, but the most bureaucratic country in the world is India. And so they took bureaucracy that the British had invented, and then they added about 10 layers to it. and everybody has a job. And I couldn't even describe you the weeks and weeks of bureaucracy it took. You know, putting our engines back in the bike was an afternoon's work. There was 10 days prior to that getting the engines back. That was only bettered once in my time around the world, Daryl, for levels of bureaucracy. And do you know where that was? Arriving in Sydney in Australia. On a public holiday weekend and trying to get the bike out of customs. I kid you not.
Yeah. What about capacity in India? Were they big bikes for India or not?
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's on little 125cc or less, you know, Bajaj, you know, bikes. Again, we look like giants. We literally were. Piers is 6'2" or 3, and quite often got stopped at the side of the road for Indians to take photographs of him. They had never seen someone so tall.
Yeah, just keep talking, Steve. I've got a good photo of that somewhere.
Yeah, sorry, what was the question, Daryl?
Oh no, I just think, you know, to go through where you've come through and then arrive into India, just that.
India was crazy. You know, India was a tale of two halves for us. The first half, we just didn't get it, Daryl. It was too much mayhem. Even for us, and we traveled through Central Asia at the time. There's a billion people on the street all fighting for part of it. But we blundered our way through India for the first half, and we never got it, and we didn't like it. And then in the second half, we'd taken a break and we came back, and we began to get a sense of the place, you know. And actually, right at the very end, we met a wonderful lady at a park in the high northeast, and before we were crossing into Myanmar, Burma, and we were telling that story, and she explained in her most inimitable style what we'd got wrong and how we'd approached it wrong, and told us things that if we'd learnt on the first day about Indian culture and customs that we didn't just have understand completely, or in fact we understood completely wrongly, our journey through India could have been much more memorable. So we got it by the time we left, and I always feel India deserves another attempt, you know, another go look see, having learnt from that experience. But it was just difficult. So there's Piers the giant. No, that was China, Piers. This wasn't India. Where was this?
No. In fact, that was Cambodia. But yeah, no, that was fairly stock.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Which way did you come?
I think for India, exactly as Steve says, you know, I mean, so by that stage, I was following behind by about 2 weeks at that stage, and I remember, you know, my last night in Pakistan was in Lahore. I went to the Wagah border ceremony, which is quite famous, where the Indian and Pakistani army face off against each other. They do it ceremonially every night. If you go onto YouTube, there's some hilarious videos, but it's a massive thing, and it's just so incredible, all this hospitality. And then I remember riding, you know, across the border into India, and you know, the first night just being quite deflated, actually, because India was one of those places that I really wanted to travel to for years and years and years and years. And I think because I'd put it on such a pedestal, and because Pakistan had been such an amazing country, You know, I found it really disappointing until, as you know, as Steve says, the second part where we got out into the east of the country. And again, it's those places where the Foreign and Commonwealth Office say don't go. You know, so Manipur and all around Imphal, and you know, sort of legendary names of Second World War battles. And but again, as soon as we got there, we just had this same incredibly friendly welcome in those areas. But the central part and western part of India was just utter bedlam. I read the book Shantaram after India, and you know, I'm sure you've come across it. If not, I thoroughly recommend it as a book, written by an Aussie, I believe, Shantaram. But it explains so clearly what's actually going on, that with the benefit of hindsight, reading through that book, there were so many phrases and so many little stories in that book that I just went, now that makes so much more sense. You know, just their default setting, and I don't know if it's linked in any way to sort of the colonial history, but their default setting was to say whatever it is you wanted to hear, or what they perceived you wanted to hear. So I remember the number of times that we would go to a fuel station and go, you know, is this 92 octane fuel? And they go, yes, sir. And no, you sure this is 92 octane fuel? Yes, sir. Of course it is, sir. You know, and you know, there's a big sign on it that said 80. No, it's 92. You know, because they wanted to say whatever it is you wanted to hear, and it took us a long time to key into that, because I think the culture was so different to the rest of Asia, which is obviously majority Muslim. So it did take us a while to sort of get our heads around India. But, you know, again, some more spectacular places, spectacular views, spectacular people. Yeah, incredible.
How did you find that run down through the bottom of Asia?
We went through Myanmar. We had to go guided through Myanmar. You just can't rock up and go across. You know, same sort of faff with, you know, not at the same level, but we needed to get together with a group. There was a government minder. There was someone in the car. We met a fantastic Aussie couple, and they shared the costs with us. They jumped into the vehicle that was carrying the government minder and the driver that you had to go through, escorted with through Myanmar. Some amazing World Heritage type site. The Bagan temples is the sort of sister temple site to Angkor Wat in Cambodia that, you know, most people might be familiar with or understand, but it's completely unvisited and untouched by tourism, really, in Myanmar. And that was an absolute highlight. But the rest of it, you know, in a country that's that's controlled in that way, they're not ready for tourism. It's difficult traveling through there, and you know, by that stage we were looking forward to get into Central Asia, you know, Southeast Asia proper, but into Thailand. Some amazing you know, Second World War sites there. That we visited, you know, on the border with Thailand, you know, bridge over the River Kwai type stories is all there to be seen in Burma. But we were looking forward to get on our journey and get out by the time that we did that.
And what did you ship your bikes from Asia and then just fly to Oz, and then how long do you have to wait?
That's where the trip started to diverge, Daryl. So coming out of Burma, Piers and I had been on the road. How long now, Piers? 7, 8 months, maybe, by this stage.
Because we were trying to get to Cambodia, weren't we, for Christmas? So we must have come through Burma probably mid-October, I think.
So and we set off on this journey, Daryl, you know, going back to the start, as a team, you know, with very different skills and qualifications and experience that we brought to the party, you know. So broadly speaking, Piers the ops director, me the ideas man, and we were safety in numbers as a team. You know, we were much stronger together as a team, and actually as a team with those broad skill sets that sit at opposite ends of the spectrum to each other but overlap in the middle. there wasn't many things that we came across that we couldn't deal with, or one of us wasn't able to find a solution through. So it was very powerful. But through the journey also, you know, my perspective, I learned to become more professional and better planned and prepped, you know. So I learned a lot from Piers, you know. Piers became softer, you know, and you won't mind me saying it, you're better human being, you know, and had more people skills than he'd had at the start. So he covered far more of the spectrum as well. And we just both, you know, there was a bit of niggle. It's a relationship at the end of the day. You know, we're good friends. We can talk about it. We had a sense that, you know, we wanted different things out of it. And we were much more confident as individuals now with a much broader skill set 7 or 8 months down the road. And the plans started to diverge from mine. There was a chap, Stuart Ball, great Australian ride, you know, Pommy, living in Australia, legend. He reached out to me, he'd been following our trip and said, hey, you guys coming to Australia? And of course, Australia was on the route a few months later. You know, once you end up in Southeast Asia, you eventually run out of road and islands, and Australia is the big island, you know, just off to the south of that. So we were heading in that direction. And he rode a bike similar to mine, and there was a big rally that was coming up in a couple of months' time in Australia, and he said, you interested in that? And I went, oh yes, absolutely. I want some of that action, and I got totally focused on that as my next aiming point. And Piers, you know, you know, for very good reasons, was in a different space completely. So the routes started to diverge at that. I took the decision to press through Southeast Asia a bit quicker than Piers wanted to go, and see a few more places, and fly my bike from Kuala Lumpur into Sydney. And that's what I ended up doing. From your perspective, Piers, coming out of Myanmar, you know, the plans changed.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's really interesting hearing you talk about Burma and sort of, you know, you were sort of wanting to get to Thailand, whereas for me, I think at that stage, you know, I was the other way around. I just loved Burma, and you know, I almost, I can remember that first day in Thailand, after we got out the border after the little incident.
A little incident.
You know, we rocked up, you know, and all of a sudden it was like being in the United States, but in Southeast Asia, you know. So there was a 7-Eleven, there was this massive petrol station, and it just all felt terribly Western. You know, and I think for me, I was kind of where my mindset was, and I'm acutely aware, obviously, we've got a large number of Aussies on the call. You know, I was looking at, well, you know, in not too many months, we're going to be back in Australia, and that means stepping back into the first world, you know, and all these wonderful interpersonal experiences we've had, you know, across Southeast Asia. It's just going to be like being back in Europe. Now, before I move on, the reality of it is I got into the Northern Territories, obviously separate from Steve, and boy, was that quelled instantly. I mean, just what a wonderful bunch of people. And I think Lefty's on the call, which is, it's great to see him, because, you know, there was a guy who single-handedly just was the world's greatest advert for Australia, the outback life, and just being, you know, an awesome guy. Just say, I think I can help you out. You know, do you want to come and stay? And that was just awesome. So I think for me, you know, I didn't want that bit to end. Whereas I think, Steve, you were probably more in the space if you were kind of quite key to get back to a little bit more of a Western feel. But just picking up on the other bit that you said, Steve, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's almost as if we were too perfect a team, in that your strengths and my strengths didn't overlap and dovetailed very nicely, such that whatever we ended ourselves up in, we had the skill set and we were both operating absolutely in our comfort zone. And for me, with the benefit of hindsight looking back, one of the nice things about then going on to go and do, you know, the 11 months solo, and, you know, I'm sure you feel the same, was that forced me to come out of my comfort zone, the stuff that I can do well, the admin, the triv, the organization, and, you know, forced me to be the one that fronted up to the guy at the border going, dude, can you help me? And so I grew much more as a person in that second part of the trip. But that's, you know, in no way, you know, denigrating what we achieved in the first part. It was just a whole different ambience, and I think it was great to sort of, as I say, get out of that comfort zone and not be able to go, if someone, if I end up in the trouble, it's all right, Steve will talk me out of it. I mean, Steve's probably got us in it in the first place, but but that was the way it was, wasn't it? There's no way, if I had ridden solo, I wouldn't have rocked up to that Iranian border on the day that we did.
So the sweet spot, Daryl, is solo adventure travel around the world, I think, and the people that are doing that are rock stars, sort of, in my book. There's a lot of female solo adventure riders going around the planet, and we met a few on our journey, and if you're two guys like Piers and I, we were in our 40s, we can handle ourselves. We're both not small. We look professional. We were well prepared, and we're not that difficult to get along with. You could have the mistaken impression that we don't need your help or anything from you, so therefore you might not offer it. But actually, we're always looking for, a little bit of support. You top tip from a local on a route to ride. What's over the horizon? Where can I get fuel? Where am I staying tonight? But when you're as well prepared as two guys sort of can be, it's not that forthcoming, and you certainly don't get on the front foot to ask for it. When you're a solo rider, the world just comes to you. We just have fun with it. You just rock up somewhere, take your helmet off, blah blah blah, just sit and wait. And if you count to 30 seconds, and if someone hadn't come up to you in 30 seconds, that was rare, to ask, hey. And in Australia, that ice was broken almost every time with, fancy beer, mate. People are just rock up a campsite with and you'd be taken off in all sorts of directions. So the hospitality had in Australia was second to none, and one of the reasons I stayed there for a very long time and stepped off the world trip, to be honest.
Did you both finish? I'm just trying to think from memory. Did one of you go to New Zealand, one went to the US, or did you both go to the US? I can't remember in the end.
We did Simpson. Are we going to talk about Simpson, Daryl? Yeah. Did you want to talk about Simpson? Yeah.
So because we've got to that Christmas, hadn't we, Steve? And then you were coming back to the UK because I think it was Liv's 21st birthday, wasn't it? And and in fact, I then came to Oz. So because I've got family in Sydney. And then so I had Christmas in Sydney, and then a road trip up the east coast of Oz with my kids, and Joe, which was just awesome. And then we met up again after Christmas. I had more issues with my bike, and we got as far as Malaysia, didn't we? And then at that stage, for the reasons we've articulated, I was really keen to ride down through Indonesia. From top to bottom of Indonesia, get across to Timor and get into Australia that way. Whereas I think, Steve, I know the thought of Java and Jakarta,
I just didn't fancy it,
You just been up for that at all. So we parted ways in Malaysia. So we had a good final night. In fact, a good mate of ours who was flying for British Airways at the time just happened to be in Kuala Lumpur on the same night. A wonderful Italian guy who we'd met cycling through the Pamir Highway just happened to be in Kuala Lumpur that night. And it was also the MotoGP tests were on as well. So, it was kind of a nice finale. And then you shipped your bike straight into Sydney. And I departed off and island hopped my way all the way down through Indonesia. And with our plan being, then to reform and meet up on the west side of the Simpson at Alice and tackle the Simpson, which, at the end of the day was, one of the reasons we took the bikes that we did was, ultimately they were designed to get us across the Simpson, because otherwise we might have been on something considerably more comfortable and luxurious than we were.
So they were compromised everywhere else, but they were absolutely in their sweet spot for the Simpson Desert. I mean, it sounds like a barking decision looking back on that now, but that's why we built the bikes that we did. The Simpson was one of the first pins on the map, You know, I dreamed about crossing that from 10 years before, and thought it was capable, and then was found wanting.
What
Yeah,
before you came to Oz, like you said, the Simpson was one of your spots. Were there other places that you wanted to see, but time was a factor, or?
You can't
yeah,
do it
and I
all,
think that
Daryl.
was one of the big things that we
Yeah.
learned quite early on in the trip. You know, I mean, if you go back to our original plan and the original map, and I haven't got a picture of it here, but we had a wildly optimistic plan. You know, and we worked out pretty quickly in the trip. In fact, I think it was in Turkey, wasn't it, when we had that first snag with my bike and the rocker arm failure down in the southwest of Turkey. And because that forced us to slow down and stop and enjoy places rather than just being right, you know, tonight we've got to get to the Nürburgring because we're going around the Nürburgring. Right, tomorrow we've got to be here because there's a festival going on in the Austrian Alps, and the following day we've got to be here because we've got tickets to go around the Ducati factory and stuff. You know, it just forced us to slow down and take stock of what we were doing. And you know, I can remember, you know, we were sat outside a cafe over Fethiye Harbour, and we were just having that discussion. Right, we've got to make a decision. If we want to do this trip, you know, in its totality, we've got to go at the same speed that we're doing already, in which case we're going to miss stuff, or we've got to trim it down and, you know, travel at the speed we want, you know. And I'm glad to say that we, you know, although I don't think we ever quite got as slow as we wanted, we did slow it down massively, and that changed the trip incredibly. But as a result, Daryl, yeah, absolutely, loads of stuff fell off. And, you know, the scary thing about this is, you know, at the start of this, you get to put a blank map of the world on your wall, and, you know, you sit there over a few beers and you go, I want to go there, and you look at it and you go, amazing. And then you look at how much of the world you're not even getting close to, not even touching. Yeah. And it sobers you up really quickly. You know, it's just astonishing how little of the world that we actually saw in the time that we were away.
We a pen on the map, Daryl. We left on the 31st of March 2016, and we did the route that we've talked all the way through to Australia, and then we were that Christmas going to ship our bikes to South America, to Santiago de Chile. This is before we set off. That was our plan, and then follow the Dakar of 2017, January 2017. You know, in South America, and then do South America south to north. You know, that's how barking a plan that we had, and we were en route to do that for the first couple of months. But I'll be honest with you, it's just a blur those first couple of months up until the Iranian border. All we would have come home with was a collection of road signs. As we were speeding past places we wanted to see, people we wanted to meet, interactions that we wanted to have. So the plan got thrown out the window, Darren, and we'd been talking about that plan for years, and it didn't. You know, we used to say in the military, it won't survive first contact with the enemy. So our enemy was time. Yeah, you know, our enemy was time. So we slowed it right down. The trip was all the better for it. And the world's still out there, you know, and we may never get to complete it. Doesn't matter. Who knows? I think, you know, Piers and I, we might take another trip one day, you know, in a different way with different people with around it. I'd love to try it again, South America. You know, that's high on the list now. And Africa as a continent, we've not set foot in.
Yeah. What about?
But it was all in our original plan of 18 months, Daryl. You know, but we'd have had a collection of road signs. You know.
What about budget?
Oh God, it's a very expansive question.
Yeah, well, you know, the reality of it is, you know, Steve and I were both, I think, you know, in lucky positions that we didn't have to do it on a shoestring. In really big handfuls at the outset, we set ourselves a loose budget of 50 US a day, which is it's about 70 Aussie, I think. You know, actually, the minute you got out of probably Italy, that was quite doable, and probably all the way through, with the exception of Thailand, Bali for me, you know, and then Oz and the States, actually you could stick to that quite comfortably. And that was accommodation, fuel and food. Obviously KTM spare parts, well, that blew a massive great hole in my budget, a pretty serious one in, you know, in Steve's budget as well. The air freighting, you know, getting the bikes across, you know, so, you know, Steve, you air freighted from KL to Oz. I did Oz to LA and then Toronto back to Lisbon. You know, both of those, that's a couple of $1,000 a, you know, a pop. You know, makes it difficult. And, but, you know, there's guys and girls going around the world on 20, 30 US a day. And then there's, you know, other people going around the world spending, you know, way more than we did. You know, I think on fuel total, I spent about 2.5 grand on fuel, UK. So what's that, about 4,000 Aussie, I guess?
Yeah. We put our life savings into it. You know, I long career in the Air Force, 27 years. You know, I put what I was comfortable with into the trip. You know, we built a bike. We were self-funded. You know, we didn't go around begging. You know, we got lots of free stuff. You know, and we worked hard at that, and we got opportunities. You know, to do that, but we didn't. You know, it's more normal these days to maybe, you know, commercialize your trip, you know, through, you know, Facebook, Instagram, all those sorts of things. But and there's a lot of people in that trap, you know, going around the world, you know, feeding the beast and doing videos and you know, it doesn't come for free. And you know, we put our life savings into it. We're both left with pensions from the military. We both had houses that we rented out, and you know, and that helped. And the budget we'd set ourselves for 18 months. Well, I stretched mine out to 2 years. You know, I spent less than I thought I would, and the main contributor to that was the help that we got, and the places that you went, and the people that put you up and let you camp in their gardens, and free meals that you know you had, and deals that you struck because people liked the cut of your jib and look at it. So that stretched the funds that we had a lot further than we thought would at the start. But we're very lucky and privileged to be in that position. And there's lots of people out there doing it tough, a lot tougher than us.
Yeah. And the truth is, Daryl, I haven't got a clue what it cost. So, you know, I kept track of a lot of figures on this just for interest, but one that I didn't keep track of particularly closely was money, because I just, you know, it's not what the trip's about.
Yeah.
You know, you cut your cloth to suit, you know, your pockets. So, you know, there was times when life was flush. You know, I mean, I can't remember, Steve, whether we both did this, or certainly I did it when I was traveling solo, is I would always treat myself to a nice hotel on my last night in the country, you know, and if that was, you know, 100 quid a night instead of, you know, the normal 20, you know, so be it. But, you know, then there was other times where, you know, money started to get tight. And again, you just have to cut your cloth, you know, accordingly. There was a time, certainly in Australia, where I thought, with all the issues I was having with the bike prior to meeting up with you, Daz, that I was going to have to call it quits in Sydney. You know, I thought, you know, I'll ride up to my mum and my sister's house and, you know, call it quits and fly home there. You know, a month and a half nearly stuck in Darwin. But, you know, because of the generosity of one of your very awesome countrymen, that allowed me then to have enough budget to run through America and finish the trip. You know, and I'm forever in Lefty's debt for, you know, for doing that. It was you know, an amazingly generous thing for him to do, and you know, it allowed me to complete the trip. And that's just it. You've got to, you know, you just have to kind of roll with the punches, and you know, cut your cloth appropriately when you know, when things don't go right.
How was the US? So many
you know,
I love the US. So many people say, "Oh, I like the US," but
yeah, I did. I had some really great moments in the US, but you know, so by the time I'd got to the bike to Sydney again, it was needing another engine rebuild. So I then flew it across to LA, took it down to a friend's house in San Diego, and then actually then came back to the UK for a couple of months for the summer holidays with the kids. And then, when I flew back, that was it. I was straight into another engine rebuild. And, and then towards the end of that, when the bike was starting to develop other faults, to be honest with you, parts of America at that stage, I think from the point I left Colorado going east, so all the stuff in the Rockies and Yosemite and Yellowstone and doing the Pacific Coast Highway and, some other sort of really great, bucket list ticks. The minute I hit Colorado and then headed east across the flyover states, it just became getting home at that stage. Mm-hmm. And that was it. It was then just about getting and crossing that Clifton Suspension Bridge, and completing the lap. So yeah, West America loved, but the rest of it, it just became a bit of a slog. But some amazing riding there. I mean, the Trans-American Trail, had just some absolutely incredible locations. Takes you, I'm just going to find a picture here, takes you to some parts of the Grand Canyon that you can only get to either on a motorbike or a helicopter. And stuff like that was just mind-blowing, take your breath away. But expensive country to travel through, certainly compared to what we'd been used to. And I think, that slight reservation I had about coming back to the first world, which I thought was going to happen in Australia, but really didn't. It did happen in Australia. I was just back to being a tourist rather than a traveler, if that makes sense. Yeah. And because of that, your interactions with people are different. If I rocked up to a place by myself, in an outback bar in Oz or somewhere in Southeast Asia, that, as Steve has said, people within 30 seconds, right, what are you doing here? Great to meet you. What's your name? Where have you come from? Don't recognize that license plate on your bike. How did you get here? Just want to chat. Whereas in America, that was became very rare. That's not to say it didn't happen. Some really great interactions, and bumping into people, but it was definitely a very different feeling to the rest of the trip.
Steve, did you go to New Zealand?
I did, yeah. Well, first of all, Australia. I decided to extend my stay in Australia, as you know, Daryl. I mean, that's a story in itself. But yeah. I arrived in Australia day one. I probably, the first 24 hours were in Australia were the highest highs and the deepest lows that I'd had on the trip. I arrived in Australia ready to go. I had a training to do that weekend on a Chris Birch rally school, and I was doing a rally the next weekend, and or very shortly after, and I needed my bike out of customs. I had a train smash in Sydney heading into a public holiday weekend, and I didn't get my bike 5 days later, and I missed it. And Piers and I, an important part of the story is we portrayed a positive attitude, and we wanted to show positivity, and it was a conscious decision to do so all the way through the trip, because we all get bombarded and we're all conscious of the negativity going around the world. There's plenty of that in the UK at the minute, whether it's COVID, Brexit, at the time, anything else. You're just bombarded with negativity. So we felt and tried to be, and it was a conscious decision, the antidote to that. We only put positive stories up. Now, that doesn't mean that the story was untruthful. We decided not to rant about how tired we were, how dusty it was, how hard it was, because our mates back home would have, they would have destroyed us, trying to say, your holiday around the world, you're having a tough time, So we decided not to do it. But I had such a crap first 8 to 12 hours in Australia. I had a rant on Facebook. I had a proper rant, yeah. And it's not like me. And I picked up on, it was picked up on by a young lady called Kina Tanjuska on her bike. She's traveling around the world, about 3 years onto it. Hi, Kina, if you're out there. And Piers had met her at Christmas a few months before when he was in Australia. And she was connected to all these Australian adventure riders. And she wanted to meet both of us because she'd been following the journey, and she was about to embark on the same journey herself, solo, around the world. So she wanted to meet us to find out about border crossings, a lot of the things that we'd crossed, about visas, you know, experience on the road, and that's it. So I had this rant on Facebook day one in Sydney, you know, proper rant. And she picked up and she said, "Hey, Steve, hey, welcome to Australia. You know, fancy a beer tonight?" Me and a couple of girls together. And the rest, as they say, is history. You know, Daryl, I mean, lovely young lady, you know, very connected in the Australian adventure riding community. From that, my 3-month visa in Australia after Simpson Desert, I stayed on. It became 6 months, then 9 months. And then at the end of that journey, you know, funds were low and I needed to get back to work. And the plan had been to get back to work in the UK professionally in the defense aerospace industry. And I got an amazing opportunity to do that in Australia, which I took up. Took a little while to get visas and security clearance to do that, you know, bureaucracy again, you know, in Australia. So I had to leave the country, and I knew I had about 6 months before I could get to the start point with that. And I did Australia top to bottom and another rally out there. And, you know, New Zealand, sorry, top to bottom and another rally out there. And I knew that was the sort of icing on the cherry on the top of the cake for my world trip. I managed to get to the polar opposite of where I was born, and I'm speaking to you now in my parents' front living room, Northern Ireland, which is the southern tip of New Zealand. Couldn't go any further away from home, and every mile after that was a mile closer to home. And I ended up working in Australia for about 18 months before I decided to come back to the UK for, you know, family reasons and personal reasons. A year ago today, Daryl. So this neatly wraps up a journey that's been 4.5 years in the making, really.
Wow.
And ending today. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to sit and talk about it today.
Yeah. And for you, Piers, has it been, you know, I guess wrapping up now as like Steve, is it hard getting back into reality, I guess?
Yeah. Do you know, it's weird, Daryl. It's you know, like when we were on the trip, I can remember Steve and I quite often saying that our previous lives in the Air Force felt like a different lifetime. And almost now, and maybe it's more so for me because I kind of gone full circle and rejoined the Air Force. You know, almost this 3 year, you know, it's been 3 years now since I got back. And, you know, it kind of almost feels like a different life as well. So, you know, for me, you know, coming back to family, kids, girlfriend, I kind of just dropped straight back into a normal life. So I kind of found that quite easy. In fact, probably what I found harder is the fact that it's taken a while to sort of start getting the itch for travel again, you know. And but yeah, definitely starting to get that itch now. Been watching Charlie and Ewan doing their long way up. I don't know if that's reached the Aussie shores yet, but you know, as Steve said, South America was probably the hardest decision of a place to cut out of the trip. And so for me, that's definitely an itch that's going to be scratched at some stage. And you know, hopefully Steve can be part of that as well. That would be you know, that would be awesome. But yeah, no, I'm loving being back in the Air Force, and you know, it's nice to have something different to talk about in the bar rather than the usual mind-numbingly dull flying stories. So no, it's cool.
What are you, before you go, what are your thoughts on the adventure space at the moment, both of you? You know, there's so many motorbikes out there. You know, you talk about
it's a great time to be alive, Daryl. We're spoiled for choice. When we did it, you know, it's 4.5 years ago now that we set off, you know.
Back in the room.
we thought we were at the sort of leading edge of this new wave thing, you know, going around the world. And of course, once we set off on our journey and got into it and started, you know, getting into the websites and that sort of thing, there's thousands of people out there doing it. Every which way we've talked about. Every bike's got 2 wheels on it. It's an adventure bike. We also sort of ran into like-minded people. There's people walking around the planet, Daryl. There's the real rock stars of the community are the cyclists.
Yeah.
There's guys riding around the world, you know, on bicycles with a lot less than, you know, we have. And they're incredible individuals, because the fortitude that takes to ride a bicycle around the world with no support, solo, they really are the rock stars of the community. Then there's, you know, the riders like us, you know, there's people doing it in every which bike. There's the four-wheel drive community. There's lots of people throwing serious amounts of money at it and doing it in unbelievable luxury or hardship, depending on what your chosen ride is with four wheels. You met a guy driving a Fiat Uno with one seat on it and sleeping in the passenger seat in Tajikistan, you know, driving around the world. And then there's people in boats, you know, the yachty community sailing around and doing it that way. So there's a whole community out there doing it. I guess the difference between back when we started now, it's become even more mainstream. Motorcycling is adventure motorcycling now. The whole superbike world has dropped off now, you know, massively. You can see in all the sales and things. So riding an adventure bike from any manufacturer, you know, short distance, long distance. But for me personally, I'm looking forward to the short trips now. You know, the COVID thing that's happened globally. You know, I just got back to the UK just ahead of that. So it was one of my better timing decisions on the planet to come home and be home with sort of elderly parents, you know, that need a little bit of support. And I'm glad to be back, and I'm back in my hometown and in my parents' front living room now. So I'm back at the origin of the graft, to the adventure I took 32 years ago to join the Air Force. And I'm back home in my home plate. And I'm looking forward to traveling 1 to 2 day trips. So the country of my birth that I hardly know, the island of Ireland, and the UK that I hardly know, because Piers and I, you know, we did the big spectacular, always had the big spectacular plans of seeing the planet. And we sort of feel that that's behind us now. And I, you know, next little bit for me is the less spectacular, shorter journeys, and reminiscing of some of the things they had. But there's a big trip, like Piers say, that I've another big trip in me somewhere, and that's the retirement trip. You know, when we properly retire. We had a midlife retirement for a couple of years. You know, our blog was called Muddlifecrisis, which was a play on midlife crisis. You know, neither of us were having crises in our life, but we played on that. But the retirement trip will probably be a South America trip, I would say. And you never know. Piers and I might dust off Muddlifecrisis and do that again. You know, who knows?
Electric.
Love to have the opportunity to do it again.
Do you think you do electric?
No, I hate electric, Daryl. I'm not convinced yet. Not my thing. No. I'm just, you know, it's the future. I want to ride a fire-breathing monster until they're banned, which is coming soon, probably. You know, no, I haven't transitioned yet. I'm a bit behind the drag curve on all things electric. No.
Yes.
Just no.
I feel the same, but I feel like it's coming at us.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure. I think you're right, Daryl. I think there's an inevitability to it, but you know, again, sort of watching the long way up stuff. You know, it's the infrastructure is just not there to support it at the moment, and yeah, no, no petrol.
You know, I think it's great. You know, I chuckled about it today. I'm doing stuff prepping for next year, and you know, I think even AdBlue in a diesel truck. You know, we struggle to get AdBlue out in outback Australia, let alone charge a bloody truck or a car or a motorcycle up. We can't even get AdBlue.
Yeah, smaller lighters the way ahead, Daryl. It'll definitely be on a smaller lighter, but we both took 690s. You know, that bike sat behind you there would be a hell of a beast to, you know, throw a couple of racks on and go with a big long range tank on it and go a bit further. You know, Honda CT125, Daryl, you've seen that one. It's not coming to the UK. You know, the modern postie bike.
Yeah.
You know, at the speed that you travel with that, open face helmet, you know, don't need all the riding gear, a little bit of lightweight armor, hiking boots instead of riding boots. You know, the speed with which you travel in one of those and the interactions that you'd have with people would mean a richer experience in almost every way, apart from the riding excitement wouldn't be there. So if you're prepared to trade that, that'd be a hell of a bike to do a big trip on.
Yeah. You got a few questions there. I don't know. Can you boys see that on your screens?
Yeah. First one, would you ride a KTM again? Do you know, as frustrating as it was every time that bike broke, and it nearly broke me. I can remember in Indonesia, you know, just to say, you know, at that stage, I'm about a month into riding solo, and it was starting to go wrong again. And I very nearly packed it in Jakarta and just shipped home at that stage. But, you know, every time that bike did go wrong, it led to an amazing story, and it led to an amazing interaction with someone, a group of people. And, you know, it's some of those stories will be the stories that I remember the longest. You know, when things went wrong, you know, when we messed up the Simpson, you know, we met you, Daryl, you know, and it's the same all the way through. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. I think I would definitely think twice about taking a KTM again. If I'm being brutally honest with you, I found their customer service and interest in even assisting me in resolving the issues I had to be lacking, shall we say. So I don't think I'll own another KTM, but I've still got the bike. I've just rebuilt it. It's taken me 3 years to get it back on the road, and I took it out for a spin up through Wales. And, you know, Steve was talking about the beautiful countryside that we have here on our doorsteps that we perhaps forget about. And it was lovely to be out on that bike again. But, you know, literally every mile I was just waiting for something to go wrong. So for me, no, I don't think I'd take another KTM.
Now, for me, a different perspective, really. You know, I used to be a Honda man, by the way, on road bikes, you know, CBR6s, Fireblades, the like, you know, back in the day was in the road bikes, you know, Honda, you know, legendary serviceability, all that, you know, but off-road, I got into KTM, and I would say right up to the start of this journey, I bled orange, you know, and the antithesis was the, you know, the BMW community, and we had quite a lot of interesting interactions on the internet, shall we say, you know, between those two communities. But, you know, as the trip went on, it became less and less about the manufacturer or the color of the bike or who. It's just about riders. You know, it's about, you know, I got to Australia and I ran into a group of BMW riding girls, so we had great fun with it, you know, right at the start. And then, you know, the interactions that I had with it, the people, I mean, my friends would never forgive me if I jumped on a BMW now and went ride around the world, but it's just banter, you know. And banter aside, any bike is an adventure bike, you know. The venerable DR, there's, you know, I have no regrets choosing what I choose. I had a hell of a ride on it, you know. And one of my most memorable days of riding was riding out of the desert, Daryl, with you side by side in twin tracks, riding, you know, better than I've ever ridden, you know, in my life, you know, after that crossing. And but a lot of me thinks DR 650 might have been the right bike to do it on for us, you know, a little bit less capable in terms of, you know, rallies that we did and things like that, but almost everywhere else better.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that high compression engine through Central Asia, just not good.
Ride whatever makes you happy. Said that from the start all the way through. Truly mean it. There's far too much in the community colloquialism about the bike you must ride and have, and the manufacturer must support. So we're both pretty agnostic to that now. Daryl.
Is there questions there? Are they comments? Thanks for sharing. Great to see your mugs, David Wright. Electric won't cut it. Flano says, for me, it's 1,420 k's a day in daylight. Bloody well put, Steve. Hito, how many rums did you have when you met Daryl on scooter? Is that, well, we could go to military now. Is that classified or unclassified?
How many what? Sorry?
How many rums?
Far too many. But if they hadn't happened, Daryl, and you hadn't uttered those inimitable words, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. That's the morning after. So are you in, boys, or not?
So there's the proof to Hito's question. So Pierce on the left, myself, and who is that?
That's me.
Is that you,
That's
Steve?
me, Daryl. Yeah.
Oh, the three of us there. So the truck driver must be still asleep under the truck.
I reckon so. Yeah, you know, Daryl, I remember Steve and I waking up that morning and just sort of pinching ourselves going, did that happen last night? did he really say, come over the Simpson with us? Right, okay. You know, and I think when we fronted up to see you that morning, we were still not 100% sure whether it was.
We didn't know if it was the beer talking, Daryl.
It was the beer and the rum talking.
I think we had a meeting, didn't we? It was, you were like, are you sure? Like, yeah, 100%, get rolling. And it wasn't like it was a short trip for you back to Alice either, was it? You know, it was still to backtrack.
1,500k away, I think.
Yeah.
But look, we had a rough ride with the weight of the bikes, the fuel that we were carrying, and the water that we're carrying. We were carrying 47 liters of fuel, more than 20 liters of water, and I you know, it snowballed for me. Piers was in much better shape and wanted to go on, but we cut our losses just before we were heading into the Knowles track, and we were going west to east, and I knew that was particularly tough, you know, with the white sand, and you know it is. And the warnings I'd had from people like Stuart and Dave Darcy that know the desert, and to not go in there if you weren't in good shape. And I was in rag order. I had a big end over end, you know, that rattled my cage, and I saw Tweety birds just before that. I got scared. I was out of energy, and we were going into an area, you know, something that potentially could have ended up in a rescue. You know, I wasn't fit to carry on. And mentally, I'd talked myself out of it as well. Piers was in much better shape, and to his credit, you know, after you know, some tough talking for a couple of hours, he came out with me, and we didn't split, you know, and you know, and on the way out of the desert, you know, with the fuel loads lighter, you know, didn't need all the water wasn't an issue anymore. We had enough to get out. We started riding like we could again, or like we knew we could, and the confidence. We actually flew out of the desert to Dalhousie Springs and did enough miles going into the middle and coming back out as a crossing would have taken, and we knew we could do it. We just didn't have the logistical wherewithal to be able to drop fuel and water in the middle somewhere, and then we ran into you, and the world changed. And you gave us the opportunity to have another go and some.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which was successful.
Yeah, hugely grateful to you, Daryl, and also to Scooter as well. You know, it was, you know, when I sit down and write down my, you know, the stories of the trip, or you know, when I have a few beers and someone starts asking me questions, inevitably it's the Simpson, and meeting you guys is normally one of the first. So you know, hugely indebted to you and Scooter for what you did for Steve and I. Kept the dream alive.
Well, thank you, and being able to listen to your amazing stories. Hey, just quickly before I let you go, and I've asked you this before, but I guess restrictions now with COVID, who knows how long till we can all jump on airplanes or do what we want to do, or travel within Australia, which is what we'll be doing next year. But if you're going to jump on an airplane and go ride a motorcycle somewhere for a couple of weeks, within that travel that you did between London and here, where would you go?
Ooh, toughie. I think probably the one country for me that I'd really like to go back to, because we kind of transited it through it, and that was at the end of the Pamir Highway in Kyrgyzstan. It became, you know, Kyrgyzstan and China became a transit to link the end of the Pamir Highway to the start of the Karakoram Highway. And as a result, we didn't spend a lot of time in Kyrgyzstan, but it is an achingly beautiful country. And some of the riding there it just looks amazing. So of the places that I rode through but didn't really get to experience the full-ish, I'd say that would be high up on there. Definitely a stack of the outback. You know, I've said to you before, I'd love to come and do the canning. That's definitely high on my my list of stuff to do. And then South America, you know, is the glaring hole. But yeah, of the stuff we went to, Kyrgyzstan for me.
I think for me, Daryl, the sweet spot for me is two places. You know, the further remote you can get and away from people generally, other than the people that you want to be with, is the sweet spot. So, and Australia has that in bucket loads. You know, you wax lyrical about the canning stock, and I bet you it's the remoteness of that place that really gets you. The outback Australia just talked to me. I felt at home out there. There was so much Irish history I didn't know about, but early settlers there I kept running into. I felt like I'd come to my homeland. And the antithesis of that is the mountainous areas, remote mountainous areas. Just, you know, when you wake up in the morning, open your tent, and you just go la 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 anywhere in a mountainous region in the world, it's just an incredible privilege to be there. And we had one other failure on the trip, which is in Nepal. We attempted to do the Annapurna loop, which used to be a walking loop. We're going to try and do it on the bikes. It's possible. And we were beaten by the weather that time through no feeling. We just got there too late in the season. Rainy had already started. The rivers were swollen. And we made a couple of good judgments calls not to lose the bikes crossing some ridiculously high rivers, you know, and we limped out of that situation, you know, and put it off. Now, finally, you know, our close friends, a lot of them still in the military, that were following our trip, used that experience, and they put together through Royal Air Force Motorsports Association an expedition, and they successfully went and did what Piers and I didn't achieve in Nepal on a military expedition last year, that I don't think would ever have had a chance to get to the start point had our journey not occurred. And Piers and I followed that, you know, every step of the way, and felt we were part of that journey, and we watched it from the safety of our laptops at home. That was a great ending to it all.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming on to talk, and bloody good to see your faces again. On fires, done it. Extraordinary to think it's been so long since we've seen each other, but it is a small world, like you said, and we'll all catch up again soon. So thank you to both of you.
Yeah, and if there's anyone else on this call that wants to know more and wants to, you know, private message, you know, either Piers and I, you've got our details there. We'll try and get back to you as soon as we can with a little bit more info and detail if you need it. But, you know, my final words are just bloody do it. You know, get to the start line and go. If you're thinking about it, you know, push yourself hard, challenge yourself, try to get to the start point. You know, you get that close, step across the start line and do it. You'll never regret it.
Yeah, exactly that. Doesn't matter if it's a week, a month, 3 months, 2 years. You know, if you've got a dream, just take the brave pill, commit to starting it, and see where it leads you. You know, it's an amazing life experience, something that I'll never forget. You know, without a doubt. And yeah, just amazing. So if you have the opportunity, if you've got something that's gnawing away at you, just yeah, as I said, take that brave pill and go and do it. You just won't regret it.
Thanks, guys. Look after yourself. Thank you, everyone. I'll put some stuff up on social media about our call 7:30 next Tuesday night as well. I've recorded this session as well, so I'll send you two boys the links as well, so you can use that. So thanks all. Take care.
All right. All the best, Al. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.